Hey, how's it going, universe? Welcome to another daily movie review. Today we're going to be talking about the 1982 film Conan the Barbarian. The film was directed by John Milius, written by Robert E. Howard, John Milius, and Oliver Stone. Stars Arnold Schwarzenegger, James Earl Jones, Max von Sydow, Sandal Bergman, Ben Davidson, Cassandra Gava, Jerry Lopez, Mako, and others. The plot synopsis is a young boy, Conan, becomes a slave after his parents are killed and tribe destroyed by a savage warlord and sorcerer, Thulsa Doom. When he grows up, he becomes a fearless, invincible fighter. Set free, he plots revenge against Thulsa Doom. So yeah, this movie, oh my goodness, this movie. Both of these movies, actually. See, it's the complete quest, everybody. That's some serious fucking business right there. Which is funny that the complete quest, just because they only made two, because the second one didn't do so well. But we'll save to talk about the second one for another day. But today we're going to be talking about the first one, the John Milius one. Pretty big movie of my youth. I used to watch it all the time. I don't know how I got away with it or why my parents just kind of let it slide. I remember it was one of those movies my dad was like excited to share with me. He had been a big just fan of the Robert E. Howard stories. He was a fan of the Marvel comics, and especially the ones that were kind of the more realistically drawn ones. I can't remember if it was Marvel that put those out, but it has all like the Frazetta artwork. There was a series of those, and I remember those just being around my house when I was a kid. Like, I just remember the pictures. I still to this day just remember sitting in my room. I think I might have like stolen them out of his room or something and was just reading them. And he kind of grew up with them. At some point, he gave them away to my cousins for some ungodly fucking reason. And they destroyed them. They didn't take care of them. But, it's unfortunate. But I got to see them before that. And he was just excited to kind of share with me the Conan lore and whatnot. I feel like he would have only have a sense memory of these movies sometimes. Like he would forget kind of what was in them or if they were appropriate, because a lot of times you gotta remember, coming out of the 80s into the 90s, like not everybody owned a VHS player, especially during the 80s. And my parents, not wealthy people, did not get a VHS player until probably the early 90s. So it would have been like 10, 12 years after this comes out that we actually have one in our house that we're watching movies and stuff like that. And Conan the Barbarian was one of them. Another one was like Alien. I was exposed to Alien pretty early. Terminator 2, The Terminator, things like that. So a lot of Schwarzenegger stuff, actually. Schwarzenegger was kind of a thing in my house. And I have so many fond memories of this. It's one of those movies that I'm not sure I can really separate my nostalgia from. I don't know if I can really talk about it fairly. I'm not sure. Like, I think I can be as objective and as critical as I possibly can. I mean, I can go for it, right? There are things that I have to critique about this movie, but I have such warm feelings just like thinking about it. And every time I turn the movie on, I watch it like it's like being wrapped in a warm blanket. It's one of those movies where if you're sick or if I'm depressed, I'll throw on fucking Conan, even if I just throw it on in the background. It kind of gives me a little connection to my past, maybe a simpler, happier time. It's one of those like talismans. So it's a weird thing. And especially since I've been getting older, it's something that I've experienced a lot more with media, which I was not really prepared for, I suppose. I've always been pretty cynical. I'm not a nostalgic person in a lot of things, but I think some of this stuff is just so tied up in moments of my life. Especially, I think a lot of the sentimentality of it comes with my father. If you don't know, my father passed away like 10 years ago now, and almost 10 years ago, almost the 10th year anniversary. And it's like, it's part of like that reflection, that inventory you take on who he was as a man, who he was as a father in our relationship. So this kind of stuff gets lumped in with that. So I'm curious, probably if I didn't have that experience, or if my father like was still alive, maybe I would not like be so wistful about these things. But here we are. I am. And so this is a great movie. John Milius, if you don't know who John Milius was, he's kind of was like this wild man, maverick Hollywood guy. Wrote things like Apocalypse Now, Jeremiah Johnson, Red Dawn, which he also directed. What else does he have for directing? He does Red Dawn, Farewell to the King, Flight of the Intruder was probably the other big one he did. Other than that, he doesn't really have much else to his name. So he was more known as a writer, and he kind of had his heyday, but apparently he was such like a nut. He was so difficult, I think, to work with that it probably kind of killed his career. There is actually an interesting documentary called Milius about kind of him and his legacy. And I know he had like a stroke and a heart attack a while ago, and he's never really fully recovered from it. Even when he does interviews, he has like an interpreter or somebody that writes down what he says for him. I think most of the stuff is all text now. So he kind of had a tragic fall in that sense. But he was the kind of guy, he was like cigar chomping, red meat eating, beer swilling, whiskey drinking, kind of like a Hollywood maverick. As much as like the Hollywood tough guys, as much as you can be in fucking Beverly Hills. Like, I mean, who wouldn't be a fucking wild barbarian in Beverly Hills? You know, you could be just like slightly right of center and be that. That's kind of what John Milius was. He was like very pro-military, like to romanticize those things, yada yada yada. Anyways, that's kind of his legacy as a person. So in a lot of ways, his approach to Conan the Barbarian is kind of reflective of his kind of worldview, which is interesting because it is more of a, I would say, an old-fashioned like sword and sorcery tale, and it's got kind of a conservative, old-fashioned heroic bent to it, and it's about kind of brutal men doing their brutal things, and how violence is met with violence, and there is really no escape from that. And that's even one of the themes of the movie, is this idea of the riddle of steel, they call it. That's what Conan's father tries to impart to him as he's talking about the god they worship, these barbarians, this where he's from, these people, the Sumerians. They worship Crom, and the riddle of steel, and what steel is to a man, and how it facilitates your life, and how everything in your life kind of surrounds having access and control over steel. And then you have, on the other hand, you have Thulsa Doom, who's much more like this secular, worldly. It's about like control of the flesh, and it's about being able to control people's will, enslavement. And then you have Conan, who is kind of represents an understanding, kind of those two worlds coming together, and what that means actually at large. It's got kind of an interesting subtext in terms of the things it decides to explore. Just this idea of kind of ideology versus kind of brute pragmatism, and how those things conflict, but how also, in some sense, they have to make peace with each other to move on. And like Conan, in a lot of ways, is a kind of coming to terms with both of those strengths, because it presents the idea, once you get to the end of the movie, that Conan has become legendary. He will be looked at upon as a legendary figure, and people have reverence for him because of his exploits, right? Well, that is, in some respect, when you're looking at a person, when you lionize a person like that, you're thinking about kind of them in an ideological prism. And Conan is that. He becomes kind of like this ubermensch idea to the culture around him. And when you're watching in Conan the Barbarian, it's really kind of like his origin story about how that develops. Now, if you're a Robert E. Howard purist, a lot of people don't like this movie, or not necessarily like the movie, because I think the fundamentals of the filmmaking are totally solid. And we can maybe talk about some of the issues maybe it has later, but a lot of purists don't really like this movie because Milius made up a lot of these conceits. Like the Riddle of Steel is a completely made up thing from John Milius. Thulsa Doom is actually a villain from Cole the Conqueror, which was another Robert E. Howard character that was kind of similar to Conan, but different in some ways, and we'll get there, I think. And Robert E. Howard, he kind of just had a group of characters that were all kind of similar, but then he actually committed suicide when he was really young. I think he was like 30, commit suicide. So his life as a writer was tragically cut short. But anyways, Thulsa Doom is from there. That was something Oliver Stone brought in. Oliver Stone had written a treatment and a script that was way more fantastical, way more probably tied to the reality of the novels. And when Milius got it, he wanted to kind of break it down more into the fundamentals of not just the character Conan, but the world that Conan would have lived in, and kind of maybe give it the pseudo-historical edge to kind of ground it in something. Which I think is largely what makes Conan the Barbarian work so well, because it does feel like kind of tangible. There's a textural nature to it that I think really works like gangbusters. And it's not so I don't know, difficult to kind of project yourself onto or have some sort of understanding. I mean, this, you got to think about when this comes out too, 1982. There had been a kind of whole era before that, preceding it, the 20, 30 years before it, of like biblical epics, of dramas that take place, of historical dramas, things like that. So kind of the world was primed for something. And while, as grounded as Conan is, there is some fantastical stuff. Don't get me wrong. But I think when it starts with these fundamentals about trying to describe societies that existed at that time and why a person may be like this and what would drive them, you need some sort of personal impetus for Conan to actually go on an adventure. When Robert E. Howard writes this stuff, he's pulling from Joseph Campbell. There's a lot of heroes myth stuff in there, a lot of the structure of the hero's journey, but it's also, he does like this kind of mise-en-scene thing with it, where it's kind of stories in motion. There's not really, as far as I understand, I've read a lot of the Conan stuff. It's not really necessarily like an origin story. Like Conan kind of is just already Conan. He's already an adventurer. He's always already kind of who he is. We never get to see how Conan became that person. And in a lot of ways, that's what Conan the Barbarian fulfills. Now, they did have a trilogy planned that never really came to fruition. John Milius had wanted to do, one that was like steel, like flesh, and then the mind. And like do a trilogy ending in like King Conan, which we never got, unfortunately. So this movie does kind of play out as a part of a larger story. It does feel very much like a part one. That doesn't mean it doesn't feel like it's a coherent beginning, middle, and end. No, it's its own movie. And if they had never made another Conan Barbarian, and maybe they should have, maybe they should have never made another Conan movie. But if they never had, the movie would feel complete, and you would feel like it was just like a cool adventure that you'd gone on. It definitely leaves the door open. It's totally wide open. It's like, but that is a story for another time. Like they obviously had plans to get Conan to this other place. And even when they end Conan the Destroyer, it ends in very much a similar fashion, kind of promising this story of Conan as a king that never obviously happened. They tried. They actually tried in the 90s, and we're going to talk about that in a few days probably. But yeah, but like I said, it can be hard for me to separate kind of my personal connections to the movie and feelings relative to the quality of the movie. But I mean, while I do think it's overall an excellent film for what it is, for like a sword and sorcery movie, it's one of the best of the era. It's also one of the ones that, like, actually, I feel like the Frank Frazetta art, the like the poster art, kind of accurately represents the movie you actually watch, which is not always the case with those things, especially a lot of those kind of more amazing but also very gaudy Frazetta artworks. Actually, I think it kind of pays off on the poster, in my opinion. It does. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Milius was smart enough to make him keep his mouth shut. It was a character thing. He's like, well, he's a barbarian. He's a man of few words, and he just kind of reacts. He's a reactionary guy. He's not a stupid man necessarily, but he doesn't really show his cards very often, which was a choice by Milius because he's like, well, Arnold in 1982 is the perfect physical specimen to be a Conan. He's got that presence. He's got kind of a natural charisma, but he's also not a great actor. So he kind of allows Arnold to just give almost a purely physical performance, which is not to take away from Schwarzenegger's performance, because being just a purely physical performer is not the easiest thing in the world when you're trying to convey things. But because of the character Conan, Arnold could kind of be big, because that's how the character is. The character is kind of like big and like over the top, and like wow. And also just some of the situations he's put in, like there's just physically difficult things that he's doing, and he's just reacting normally to them. I think the cast itself, the rest of the supporting cast are all really, really good. If I had one maybe complaint, it's Sandal Bergman, who plays Valeria, which ends up being Conan's love interest in the movie. And she was cast for her physicality, kind of just in the same way that Arnold was. And which is a kind of a theme of this era. They just wanted people that like looked like the drawings, and she definitely fulfills that. And she's good in here. She's not like awful or anything like that, but she's also not a great actress. Not that she's really bad, but I think, with the rest of the cast being as kind of strong as it is, I mean, you got like James Earl Jones, Max von Sydow, Mako, who, if you don't know who Mako is, I mean, come on, what's wrong with you? You know who Mako is, baby. Yeah, he died in 2006. Yeah. Why the has like fucking Pearl Harbor as one of his known for? It's like, come on, man. This dude's like a legend. He was also the voice of Aku in Samurai Jack, if you've ever seen that. He's in Lionheart. Walker, Texas Ranger? Come on, this guy was all over the place. Highlander, The Final Dimension, RoboCop 3, My Samurai. I think wasn't he on fucking Sidekicks as well? Anyways, prolific actor. He's a good guy. Prolific Japanese actor. If you have that kind of cast supporting Arnold, it just enriches everything. It just makes actually Arnold's, I guess, I don't know, lack of ability not matter that much. I mean, when you have Thulsa Doom, all right, let's just talk about Thulsa Doom. One of my all-time favorite movie bad guys. I mean, all time. Like, James Earl Jones gives like an all-timer great fucking performance as Thulsa Doom. I mean, the little monologues that he gets to give, there's only a few of them, but he's also another guy. His performance is largely physical. He's able to just fucking look at the camera. And it's kind of completely engrossing and enigmatic and kind of scary at the same time. Like just this kind of presence and power that he has, what he puts out there. It's really impressive. It's an impressive performance. I think it's one that often gets overlooked, and the rest of the cast is great. Like I said, I'm trying to find the guy who's like the surfer dude, Billy something. Is it Jerry Lopez, who plays Subotai, who's like kind of like the thief sidekick that you gotta have. He's like a California surfer dude who just kind of got the role because John Milius liked him, and he cast him in the movie. And he's actually really good. He's pretty great. Some of the themes I really like, and probably one of the reasons why it kind of has a lasting impression on me, or why I still like it, because I just think there's something there. There's something there in the subtext that I really respond to, and it's this idea of like Conan kind of going on this reckless series of journeys to reestablish his legacy of his family and reclaim like his family name, kind of. There's this thing in the beginning where his father's talking about, making the sword and steel, and then blah, blah, blah. And that sword ends up getting taken by by one of the bad guys, not Tulsa Doom, but one of the bad guys. Like Conan ends up having a fight with one of the lackeys that stole the sword later in the movie. He gets it back and it breaks. And he still takes his father's sword, and that's what he uses to kill Tulsa Doom, the broken sword. Which is kind of, to me, was kind of almost like a commentary on the idea of like what I was talking about before, about this idea of like the will of the flesh and also the steel. Like you need to have both. You have to have like a balance, a symbiotic relationship. They have to form something to actually like successfully, for you to be a whole person. And that's what allows Conan to kind of reclaim the Sumerian honor in killing Thulsa Doom, because he does it with his father's old sword, and he believes in Crom, and he talks about, the importance of steel, but he's kind of learned this lesson about, about control and about his own will, about how far he is willing to go to find justice for himself and for his people in a kind of broad sense, And the movie is not very explicit about that. It's not like kind of like spelling it out for you, but I think if you've seen it as many times as I have and you're paying attention, it's there. It's definitely there. Yeah. So what can I say? I'm a fucking Conan the Barbarian fanboy. I really love this movie. I am super fucking bummed that we never got at least the last one in the trilogy. I was hoping that during this kind of heyday of people coming back and doing reboots and making sequels 20 years after the fact, that we might get a King Conan. And there were rumors for a long time. Arnold was even trying to make a campaign for it a couple years ago, but apparently the rights to Conan are all over the fucking place. So good luck, I guess, is what the word on the street is good luck getting that made. Super bummed about that, man. Honestly, I would love to see Arnold like come back as an old man and be Conan. Do it one more time. And just do the end of Beowulf. Just do the end of the Beowulf story. Just do that with Conan. I'd be happy. It should be kind of the same thing, honestly. But yeah. But they did do a version of what they had tentative plans to do, and we'll talk about that another day. It's all going to be of course I did. It's a little preview for the rest of the week or the rest of the next few days. Is like I watched all of the Conan stuff and a few things that are tangentially connected to Conan. So that's a little teaser for you. So there you go. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to know more about Zoobox, you want to keep up to date with everything Zoobox, there's a bunch of links in the description for Facebook, for Instagram, for my personal Twitter. Also, if you would like to make a recommendation for one of the daily videos or something for Zoobox Goes to the Movies, don't hesitate. Just throw it in the comments and we'll take a look at it. All right, everybody. Have a great one. Goodbye.